Shooting from the Lip features views and opinions from smart, funny, serious, and not so serious people. This show is intended for a mature and not so mature audience. Enjoy the show.
Live from the Shooting from the Lip studio in Louisville, Kentucky, it's the KT Unearthly Show with your hosts, Kevin Hale and Tiffany Mac.
Tiffany, I don't know about you, but that's about as professional as it can get for us, that type of voice intro. What do you think?
You gotta love the Mouse of the South.
Can we go on and give props to who did it for us?
Amen. Yeah, go right ahead.
You arranged that.
Micah Hanks. Yeah, we are in love with our new voice intro. Micah Hanks, thank you for doing that for us.
Yes. Much love, Micah, for the nice little intro for us. It is Friday night. It is the KT Unearthly show with myself, Kevin Hale, and Tiffany Mac doing it up. This latest edition. What's up, T-Mac?
Well, there's been a lot of things going on this week. It's been a really eventful week for me, but we would like to maybe hit on a few things. We've started doing the Paranormal Presence segment, and for that, this evening, we're actually going to hopefully tie it into the show. I'd like to broach the topic of the black shadow beings, and yeah, it's sort of a scary topic. I know a lot of people have seen shadows, but shadow beings, as the name suggests, are characterized by simply a dark black shadow figure. Sometimes the figure might be wispy, other times more solid, but the shape is usually in human form. So some non-human, possibly animal shapes and things like that, have been reported. The shadow usually is from 3 to as much as 7 feet tall, and sometimes there is a faint facial feature that can be seen, most notably the eyes. On rare occasions, the full face is seen. But so the shadow usually doesn't show any signs of arms or legs. Shadows seem to have the ability to move at great speeds, and they can be seen standing still, then quickly accelerating out of view. But they don't seem to be contained by walls or other solid structures as they've been seen passing through them. So some believe that these shadows are or could be alien entities or alien life forms, but they could actually be the alien itself or a telepathic manifestation of their projection into our world. So this theory isn't widely discussed, but it deserves to be mentioned at that time. But so now some of the things that have haunted me lately have been this type of entity. They typically appear just after I lay down and close my eyes, and it usually begins with a feeling of someone watching me. Typically, you have this paranoid sensation. Kevin, do you know what I'm talking about?
I feel you.
I know you think I'm paranoid. It's okay. I'll admit it. But anyway, so when you do have this experience, sometimes you just open your eyes and you look around and you let your eyes adjust, and suddenly, bam, they're like right up in your business. Sometimes they hover at a distance or in the corner of the room, and you can see them. You don't have to look directly at them because a lot of times you see them from the corner of your eyes, and then they'll rush you and they'll get right up up close and personal, right in your face. And up until this past year or so, I would have screamed and flailed and nearly lost my cookies, just tossed them and been in complete fear. As you know, I've had a lot of getting used to this whole paranormal alien ufology world. And I've sort of learned a few techniques that make them leave me alone. So the first thing is to pretty much just check your emotions. They seem to thrive on fear. You don't want to give in to your fear. You stand your ground. And if you have any type of religion to fall back on, Kevin, I'm not talking to you specifically, but you begin, the best thing to do would be to pray and pray for those entities to get the hell out of your room, get the hell out of your life, stop bothering you. And then another thing I tend to do is, and maybe it's when I'm really feeling chicken, I'll flip the lights on and I'll build a bit of confidence. Now, this doesn't make them totally vanish or leave you alone, because as soon as you turn your lights back off, they're right there harassing you again. But I'm not afraid to sleep with my light on. I will admit that it's just something that has sort of lived on with me since childhood. And yeah, I might be a little chicken, but it's okay. I'm not too afraid to admit it. But it might not, so it may not make them go away, but it makes you feel a little bit less vulnerable. But unfortunately, a light may not deter them, as I've actually seen these shadow beings in the light as well. And I think that, you know, people have seen these portrayed in movies and films, and you see them rushing you or coming out of the dark closet. And, you know, it's just part of the beast. But being forceful and telling them to get the hell out and leave you alone seems to be one of the best ways to get them to depart. You just sort of have to stand your ground and just let them know that you're not going to take their crap. So I also like to keep crystals in my room, and I'll grab them up and I'll sit with them and I'll hold them, and I will direct them to leave, imagining me surrounded in like white light. And it seems to be a little bit hokey, but it tends to work. So you sound like you have a question. Do you have a question for me,
No,
Kevin?
it was a statement based on what you just said, and I do believe, and yeah, I think you're genuinely telling us things that you've endured, experienced, and your strength, beliefs, or fighting or counteracting these presents. All I can say is that based on what you've told me, I'm glad I am 100% a badass, because I don't think I could endure what you've endured.
Bad man.
If
Well, that's the kind of attitude you need to maintain, is all I can say, because the first time you show your fear, you're sort of screwed, because they do feed on it. And you know, that's why a lot of times it's children.
Right.
You know, it's the children that get probably more terrified than anybody, even though as an adult I'm still scared crapless occasionally. But Kevin, we have a great guest tonight. And he's a guy who I really respect as a researcher and an author. He writes a mean story. Why don't you just give us a little bit of background on our guest tonight?
My pleasure. Mr. Nick Redfern is an author of 36 books on UFOs, lake monsters, zombies, Hollywood scandals, including Men in Black. Nick, he's appeared on many TV shows, including some of my personal favorites: Monster Quest, Ancient Aliens, UFO Hunters, America's Book of Secrets. He's appeared on news shows such as Fox. He's definitely a guy that I genuinely respect his opinion. And he does seem like he's one who's taking the time to do his own research and, you know, and formalize an opinion or an expression based on either his experiences or what he's as far as his homework goes. But as soon as Tiffany, you said you got Nick on the show tonight, I was like a kid at a candy store waiting for this Friday night. So, hey, it's time to get the party started.
Yeah. Well, so let's just say we've all seen the movies like Men in Black with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, but the real Men in Black have a much more mysterious and ominous presence in the UFO world. So one of the first people to discuss these strange characters in real life was a man by the name of Albert K. Bender, who was a civilian investigator for the International Flying Saucer Bureau, who claims to have been intimidated and silenced by 3 men in dark suits. And eventually, he ends up writing his own story about their identity, where they came from, and what their purpose was. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but he's not the only person who claims to have this knowledge. There's been many people around the world that have been witness to these strange, emotionless beings, even after seeing some anomalous lights in the sky and craft up close. So, with this being stated, we would like to introduce Nick. How are you doing this evening?
Hey guys, I'm doing good, thanks.
Awesome.
Nick.
Good.
Cool. Thanks for coming on, Nick.
We would like you.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Can you give us a little bit better picture of these so-called men in black?
Yeah, sure. Well, you meant, I mean, it's good that you brought up the movies with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, because that's sort of the perception that everybody kind of has of the Men in Black, you know, that Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, they kind of focus on the movie angle of the Men in Black. But a lot of people don't realize that the movies were actually inspired by real-life reports of the Men in Black. But the big difference is that whereas in the movies, the Men in Black are the employees of like a super secret agency within government, or that even operates outside of government, if you read the vast majority, I would say at least sort of 90% and probably close to 95, 96% of all the reports, they actually fall into a very different category where people describe the Men in Black as sort of being very kind of skinny and pale, and sometimes they have these large, oversized eyes which they hide behind wraparound sunglasses. And you mentioned Albert Bender, who created this group called the International Flying Saucer Bureau in the early 50s, and how Bender was visited by these 3 men in black and essentially was silenced by them to the extent where he left ufology behind, just briefly coming out of retirement to write a book on the subject and then vanishing again. But what happened, to give you a bit of a backstory, Albert Bender lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he was someone who, even before the UFO subject came along, he was someone who was already heavily involved in the world of the paranormal and the occult. And he wasn't sort of a dabbler, he was someone who was sort of very well versed in the world of the occult. And of all places possible, he lived in this old house that kind of looked like Norman Bates' mother's house in Psycho, and he lived in the of all places possible. He lived in the attic. As I said, he was very well versed in the world of the occult. He undertook regularly sort of paranormal rites and rituals to try and summon up supernatural entities. If you read his written work, it's pretty clear that he opened a doorway to some sort of paranormal realm, and it allowed pretty hostile and malevolent entities through, and they sort of appeared or manifested, if you like, in the form of these sort of dark clothed entities, and he described them as having pale skin and these weirdly shining eyes. What he actually also said was that he knew when the Men in Black were going to turn up, not because they knocked on the doors like in the movies, but he would start to feel ill and sick and lightheaded, and he'd have to lay down on his bed. And he said the room would be filled with this sort of overwhelming odor of like brimstone or sulfur, which are sort of classic aspects of a lot of paranormal activity. A lot of Albert Bender's early experiences were sort of steeped in the world of the supernatural. When he had these visitations, he felt quite sick, both physically and psychologically afterwards, and it sort of brought him to the edge of, I guess, like a nervous breakdown, and that's why he left the subject, only to briefly resurface in '62 to write this book, Flying Saucers and the 3 Men. So, ironically, the man who, bearing in mind the movie versions, it's ironic that the man who largely, if not almost single-handedly, gave birth to the Men in Black mystery was someone who believed that they were sort of paranormal things that didn't so much appear on your doorstep, but they sort of manifested based around these rituals and rites. So, it actually, although it has obviously a strong UFO tie to it, it also ties very deeply into sort of the world of, like I said, the paranormal and the occult as well.
Let me jump in here, Nick. In doing my research, I came across a gentleman by the name of John Keel, a ufologist. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and where he claimed to have encounters, but referred to them as demonic supernaturals, dark skin, exotic facial features. What's your take on his interpretation or experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, Keel's books were, I started reading Keel's books when I was a kid, sort of about 13 or 14. And, when I sort of first got into this subject, everything was kind of black and white, that UFOs are extraterrestrial and Bigfoot was an unknown ape, etc., etc. But then the more that I read into the subject, the more I kind of came around to Keel's views. And he sort of viewed all of these weird phenomena as somehow connected, that the reason why we never catch Bigfoot or we never, catch the Loch Ness Monster or people see all these weird creatures, he felt it was all sort of part and parcel of one phenomenon that was somehow interacting or kind of manipulating the human race. And I think there's a lot of evidence for that. And certainly when it came to the Men in Black, Keel was someone who, when he started, for Keel, it really kicked off in sort of 66, 67, when he traveled to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to investigate the Mothman sightings that were going on there. Right. And he found that people who had seen the Mothman, a lot of them had seen UFOs. Many of them had had sort of weird phenomena in the home, like poltergeist activity and things like that. And then sort of the culmination of it all was they were getting visits from the Men in Black. And kind of like Albert Bendel's Men in Black, they looked nothing like government agents. They were sort of short and creepy and skinny and pale. They kind of looked anemic and anorexic and just, people said they just didn't look well. They looked kind of sickly looking. But everybody got this sort of creepy vibe from them, to sort of essentially like stay away, that kind of thing. And they frightened a lot of people just by their appearance. So, I don't doubt Keel's stories at all. And I've written 3 books on the Men in Black and one which comes out shortly called Women in Black. And for years I've sort of, tried to demonstrate to people that whatever they are, the Men in Black and the Women in Black and the Black-Eyed Children and all these associated things, they're not from the Pentagon or the CIA. But people still think that, and that's just really due down to the success of the movies. But the real versions are sort of totally different, and Keel sort of really kind of skillfully got that across by, he sort of presented them almost as like modern day vampires or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. There was also, and this is testing your Hollywood knowledge. I was looking. There's a movie that was made, I want to say early 80s, maybe 1980, Hangar 18.
Oh, yeah.
Which supposedly is the first movie that per se introduced the Men in Black. And what's kind of neat is one of the guys in the movie, Darren McGavin, who went on and did the lead role with the Night Stalker, Carl Koschek. You had the DVD set, which I too am a huge fan. So,
cool.
yeah. So, and Hollywood has always had they've had this fixation when it comes to ufology, some serious, some in a very humorous, tongue-in-cheek way, as Will and Tommy Lee portrayed. Does Hollywood get it, or what's your take on how the whole?
Well, I think Hollywood is primarily a money-making business, and so they do what they have to do to make money. And I think, I enjoyed the movies. There's nothing wrong with them. I thought they were fun, enjoyable movies. but I think, they sort of presented it from the perspective of sort of a light-hearted movie that kids and adults could watch and have a good time, and it worked well in that sense. Had they kind of presented the Men in Black as they really are, it would have been a far sort of darker, mysterious kind of movie that probably wouldn't have got a certificate, where young kids could watch it. I think, exactly. and that isn't what Hollywood wants. Hollywood wants to get the biggest audience as possible. So, you kind of tone it down and make it where, it's sort of like almost like a paranormal version of a James Bond movie. These secret agents, but they're not trying to stop, somebody who wants to take over the planet. They're trying to stop aliens. And, but I mean, that's Hollywood. I mean, you can find numerous books that have been written and transferred into movies, and their key parts are nothing like the original novel. But that's one of the hazards, I guess, of getting into the world of Hollywood. But I mean, as I said, the main factor of the movies, the MIB movies, is that they were so successful. It almost created like this meme that the Men in Black were from the government, rather than looking into the backstory of how, they kind of looked like and acted like sort of pale-faced vampires or, something almost out of The Walking Dead.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was getting at is, has Hollywood made Men in Black 2 Hollywood to where when you're writing these books or these ufologists or people in the paranormal are trying to document who these people or being whatever really are. Is there kind of like a it's like that's the Hollywood stereotype, is that winning versus what really is possibly the real truth?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the Hollywood version is, far more popular. I mean, books on the subject, if you look at the UFO subject in general, there's a lot of topics that are sort of really popular: abductions, crashed UFOs, Roswell, Area 51. I guess the Men in Black is sort of more of a fringe aspect of the subject, where it's either something you're interested in or you're not, or you might sort of pick up the occasional book on it, but it's something that I think doesn't sort of get the coverage that other aspects of the UFO phenomenon do, which I think is unfortunate, because there is a fascinating story to tell, or actually stories, which is why I've written 4 books on the subject, because there is so much material. I get literally, I would say, even modern day case, I'll probably get 4 or 5 reports a week, I would say, of people who've seen the Men in Black, and typically they're nearly all sort of creepy and weird. So I think that there are a lot of sort of offshoots of the UFO subject where people so we'll take like a cursory, a casual interest in them, but they won't sort of focus on it extensively. And I think the Men in Black angle, unfortunately, falls into that category. There's a really intriguing mystery there, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily always get picked up as I think it should.
Right, I agree.
Nick, so when we look at Facebook, which is a prime spot for viral videos, they're buzzing about this video where a guy describes the weird encounter of his colleagues who had who had this experience of these Men in Black who were asking strange questions about him. He even got some footage of them from a hotel security camera, and apparently these 2 absolutely identical looking men in the same suits and same hat and the same glasses, they came into the hotel where he works and started just asking everybody questions. And then with no explanation, they just simply left. So, I actually did hear an interview with him afterwards regarding the video, and he said he really didn't know why they were asking questions about him. He really didn't understand. Do you know anything about that specific story? Or any further information
only in the sense
like that?
It is an interesting story. It's interesting because of the footage. Over the years, there have been a few photographs surfaced of Men in Black type characters, and kind of like the ones in the, this hotel lobby footage, that they kind of look weird and strange and clearly out of place. But the problem is that he's trying to take it any further than it's been taken now. It's kind of like the situation with a photograph of a UFO. You can analyze it and say, well, yeah, there's something clearly there that's unknown, but what is it? And that's kind of the same with this footage. It's two guys in black suits. They look odd, and it's tied to a UFO story. But unfortunately, as is the case in nearly every UFO report on file, Men in Black report on file, that they sort of vanish as mysteriously as they first appeared. So any evidence is sort of standalone, and there's no backup evidence. So for me, it's a fascinating piece of footage, and I don't think it's a hoax at all. But the problem is, they were so elusive, and we're here that 1 second and gone the next second, that we're not really able to do anything more than we've sort of reached already, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, can you give us a very strange story that really stands out with you involving the Men in Black?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I don't know how long we've got tonight, but I mean, I could actually give you dozens of such stories. What I would say, probably the most interesting ones that I've got, are where the Men in Black turn up, and they don't just sort of, or they don't even necessarily threaten the person, but they actually seemingly have the ability to affect the person's health even. We're talking about what clearly to me are sort of very dangerous supernatural creatures, and I think creatures is the best way to describe them. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. I've got a lot of reports on file where people have been visited by the Men in Black, and literally within hours or the very most days, they've fallen extremely ill with both physical and psychological illnesses, sometimes dangerously ill, as if they'd almost suffered from what we might call like a supernatural infection or something along those, or contagion, that kind of thing. And very often this ties in with the Men in Black sort of arriving at people's doors late at night, and somebody knocks on your door late, and this sort of gets to the point of your question about, sort of really creepy stories. Somebody knocked on your door like a slow bang late at night, you probably wouldn't open the door. At the very least, you're going to look through the spy hole. You see these sort of weird little...
I would get my gun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Check my alarm system. Call my neighbors.
Exactly.
Tiffany, you would think it was an old boyfriend, be honest.
I might. I've got a few of those around here somewhere, too. I'm sorry. Continue on, Nick.
But the weird thing is that people do let them in, and afterwards the people have felt that their minds have been sort of taken over to where they were almost hypnotized into opening the doors. Now, you might imagine, because the Men in Black sort of silence people, that they would force their way into the house. But they don't. It's like in this hypnotic state, the person feels impelled to invite them in. And this kind of ties in with the whole old mythology of vampires, that the first time they visit your home, they cannot sort of cross the threshold. They have to be invited. And that's the same with the Men in Black and the Women in Black and the black-eyed children. They all wait to be invited in. And when people do invite them in, that's when they start become threatening. And as I said, I've got reports of people falling sick. A lot of reports where people have said that they actually felt as if these things were like a psychic vampire, whereas, in the classic stories, vampires feed on blood. They actually felt as if these things were sort of feeding on their life force and their energy. And they kind of felt, one actually described it, they kind of felt like a diabetic who was starting to crash, who'd sort of missed breakfast and lunch, and now it was like 8 o'clock at night, and they were starting to get cold, clammy, and the shakes and weak, and that's how a lot of the witnesses to the Men in Black have felt. So, that, to sort of get back to your question again, when you asked, is there a creepy story that, I've got dozens that sort of fit all those characteristics that I just described, and every one of them is sort of really creepy and weird. So.
Now, do you have cases of recurring visitations?
Oh, well, that's actually a very good question, because for the most part, we actually don't get recurring visitations. It's usually a one-off. But what people do get, if they've seen the Men in Black, there are often follow-up situations where they get weird phone calls in the middle of the night. And, you wonder, is it somebody calling me bad news? So they obviously get up and answer the phone. And very often there's like weird static on the phone, on the line, or there's what sounds like a foreign language, but a language that they can't, they can't say, like, it sounds French or it sounds German or whatever. It's just like really weird and fast, almost like a chattering, but in an odd language. And people also get electronic interference in the home. One of the weirdest things of all is that people who've had just one visit from the Men in Black, often in the days afterwards, they experience a lot of violent poltergeist activity in the home. I've got a lot of stories like that as well, as do a number of other researchers as well, like Tim Beckley. He's got a number of cases like that too. So, in other words, they don't necessarily get like a physical knock on the door again, but there are all these kind of, I guess what we might call side effects. Like I said, poltergeist activity, weird stuff going on in the home, like lights blowing out and freezers and refrigerators suddenly shorting out, and as if your entire house or apartment had just been blitzed by something that like targets electrical equipment, and everything was just blowing out and dying. So we get a lot of weird stuff like that.
So do you actually hear, are these conversations that are taking place audible, or are they telepathic, or do these people speak in a way that is visually seen as well as heard? I mean, do they, a lot of times you say they're sort of like these nondescript facial features or whatever, but do they hear them? Do they see them? What kind of experiences are they?
Well, sometimes the Men in Black typically do ask questions, or they threaten them. They'll make sort of like a couched threat against the person. But again, the person is usually in this sort of weird altered state, sort of almost like, if you're coming round from anaesthetic and you're sort of, you're feeling a bit spaced out. That's how the people feel. Now, in some cases, the people do receive questions, but before they get the chance to answer, it's almost as if the Man in Black kind of answers it for them in his own words, as if they can kind of read your mind. So that happens a lot. Now, when you say what people, do they see them and hear them, there are actually a number of cases where the witnesses felt or suspected that the Men in Black weren't actually sort of living entities or creatures in front of them. They thought they were almost like a sophisticated hologram. The best way I can describe it is if you've seen the Matrix movies, where you have these Men in Black type characters in there, they're known as the agents, and they're not actually physical beings. They're like this highly sophisticated, like a simulation, like a computer program, like a hologram. That we all think we're living in this 3D world, but in the movies, in the Matrix movies, we're like in a never-ending sleep, and we're living in this holographic dream world. A number of witnesses actually said they actually felt that's how their Men in Black experiences occurred, that they were in a sort of an altered state of mind, and they actually wondered afterwards if the Men in Black were ever really physically in the room, or if it was some sort of highly evolved holographic Matrix type scenario where the Men in Black weren't even physically real, that they may not even have been self-aware. They could have been like a computer program, but in a 3D form that is constantly sent out. Every time they need to silence someone, they kind of insert this program into the Matrix, if you like, and threaten us. But it's not like a living creature or a living being. It's like it's like opening a Word document or something like that and performing a task. So a lot of people have said that they felt that if anybody else was in the room with them and they were sat on the couch, that other person might not see anything going on. They just might see the victim sort of in a weird trance-like state, But for the witness, it's like a very real physical experience. But maybe a lot of it is sort of a hallucination, not hallucination in the sense that the person's imagining it, but like a directed, programmed hallucination to threaten them.
Yeah, I guess reality to me would be is that should these experiences happen to someone, or you know, if they're being visited by, you know, per se Men in Black or whatever entity, there's no true, you know, for the third person, there's no rhyme or reason to try to understand it, because it's, you know, it's not I guess really what is if Tiffany is getting visited and she's trying to tell me the story, I can't really relate to it because it's happening to her, and I'm probably not meant to understand it, and you know, so.
Well, there's actually another aspect to that as well. It's that when you say, you know, trying to understand the cases, some of them are just so weird that they just don't, you know, it's almost difficult to get your head around them because they ask some of the most bizarre questions. And sometimes it's as if they're not sort of fully aware of our mannerisms and customs. And some of the witnesses have said that when the Men in Black are speaking to them in English, it's almost as if they're speaking English, but they don't understand it. It's like they've learned the words, but they don't know what they're saying. You know, it's kind of like if you learn sort of parrot fashion a sentence in Russian, you could say it, but you might not have any clue as to what you're actually saying. And that's what people have said. They kind of felt that as well, as if the Men in Black there was something just off about them, just something really weird where they just didn't come across as human and they didn't act like humans. And that's one of the main reasons why so many people are fearful of them. Not so much what they say and do, but they feel like they're sitting across from something that looks human but actually isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel that there's any type of okay, let's go to one of these situations and say, if you were to look outside your window, outside your door, outside your office, do you think that there would be a vehicle involved?
Well,
if these were not holograms, would there be a vehicle involved in some of these cases?
Well, again, that's another really good question, because a lot of the reports, people do talk about seeing these cars, and they're typically described as like 1950s era cars, like black Cadillacs, you know, with like the shark fin tails, that kind of thing. They sort of look like what you would see like gangsters in some old, I don't know, like a 1950s Humphrey Bogart gangster movie. You know, that's the clothes that they wear. Yeah.
You mean
they
today?
sort of wear what's that?
You mean today? That's what you would see?
That's what they look like. They kind of dress in the old style. They wear the fedora hats and they drive these old cars. But there are literally dozens of cases on record where people have said they've seen the Men in Black, and the Men in Black, when the interrogation or the threat's over, they leave the house. Sometimes the Men in Black literally kind of vanish on the doorstep, and I do mean literally vanish. And as they do, the car vanishes as well, as if maybe even that was some sort of holographic, stage-managed thing as well. You know, that was part of this sort of weird theatrical process that they go through. And so, you know, cases, I mean, there's a famous one that I looked into in England where two police officers got called out because the witness had seen a UFO, and they'd received these weird knocks on the door, and these two strange guys turned up. And they didn't think of anything to do with UFOs. They just thought somebody was harassing them. And it happened time and again, and it got a bit sinister. So they called the local police out, essentially to see if they were like burglars, scoping the property, that kind of thing. And as the police turned up, they saw this old, it wasn't a Cadillac, but it was like, interestingly enough, it was an old British-type car. And they said they got close to it, the car just faded away, you know. And stories like that, they're almost impossible to sort of figure out what's going on. But it's sort of another aspect suggesting that there's something about reality when it comes to the Men in Black that isn't real. You know, it's as our perceptions on what passes for reality go out of the window when we're dealing with the Men in Black, and even with their cars as well.
I'm curious, how would the police write that up?
Well, they may not have done. You know, I mean,
Exactly.
I actually know a lot of police officers in the UK who've had UFO experiences, you know, because the cops are the people out in the middle of the night, early hours, sort of patrolling round. So the chances are, if UFOs are flying around in those hours, they're the people who are going to see them, you know, while the rest of us are fast asleep or whatever. But I know of a large number of cases where police officers in the UK have seen UFOs, and they just chose not to report it because, number one, they didn't want to be known as the police officers who see UFOs. Number two, they were kind of worried about would it have any bearing on their, you know, advancement through the police force and, you know, getting higher ranks, etc. And also worried in case if the media got hold of the stories and, you know, then they become known outside of their own office, but, you know, as somebody who's seen little green men, which is typically the sort of the angle, you know, that the press, and particularly the tabloid press, follow. So, you know, I can actually understand why a lot of police officers wouldn't report these cases. And, you know, there could be, who knows how many on record where they just said, you know, to each other, looked at each other in the car, you know, in the patrol car and said, look, let's agree not to talk about this. And they don't. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Deep.
Well, that sort of goes along with the whole sightings by, you know, pilots of all different sorts and not wanting to really make too much of a fuss about it because people tend to be told to leave and there's the door and you're delusional or we don't talk about this.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you bring up, you know, the issue of pilots because the reason why I got interested in the UFO subject, I'm someone who's never sort of had a profound UFO encounter, but my dad was in the British Royal Air Force and he was a radar mechanic, and this was still at the height of the Cold War when the Soviet Union was still around, and my dad was involved in several UFO incidents where UFOs were trapped flying very high and fast, approaching the English coastline across the North Sea and the English Channel, and pilots from the British Royal Air Force pilots, which is the Royal Air Force's equivalent to the US Air Force, they were scrambled to intercept these objects, and some of the pilots reported seeing these dazzling bright lights. They were performing all sorts of weird maneuvers, like traveling at 700 and 800 miles an hour, and then suddenly coming to a complete halt in a second, you know, which would be impossible for a human pilot with our aircraft because the G-forces, you know, would just kill you and the plane would be torn apart. And so my dad was brought in to check out the radar equipment as a radar mechanic to see if it was working properly, and it was. And everybody came to a conclusion that whatever these things were that the pilot saw, but they were definitive UFOs, and everyone was taken into a room and told, you know, you won't talk about this, and you'll keep it to yourself. And you know, my dad didn't tell anybody till I was about 13 or 14, and that's what sort of really got me interested in all this. You know, not just because it was my own dad, but because he was trained in the military. You know, he worked on radar, and he knew he didn't speak to the pilots because obviously they kept, you know, everybody apart from each other. But the rumour trickled down that how the pilots had seen these things and had chased them, and eventually they had to return to base because they were running low on fuel. That's how long they were chasing them for. And so that got me interested, and it sort of demonstrated to me that credible people, as you said, like pilots, were seeing these things. And then the fact that they were told not to talk about it, probably like my own dad, a lot of them didn't, you know, perhaps talk until they were in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, perhaps, when they felt more comfortable, I should say, not less comfortable, felt more comfortable and less concerned about talking about this. You know, sort of 50 years later, it's probably not going to matter, but, you know, you talk about it to your wife or your husband or your children, 48 hours later, you know, you might find somebody coming down on you. So yeah, that sort of made me appreciate early on how, you know, pilots are seeing these things and tracking them. But again, maybe not talking about them like the police as well.
Mm. Wow. Guest tonight, Nick Redfern, who, if there's been a UFO show, anything you followed your paranormal on TV, Nick, you've made your acquaintance on lots of shows. How do you find yourself on all these shows? Not that I'm complaining.
That's another good. You're asking some good questions tonight. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy doing TV for several reasons. You know, I mean, it gives you the opportunity to talk about things that you know about, and you can share with other people who are going to like the shows as well. Hopefully, you know, I mean, I'm not just somebody who takes part in TV shows on the paranormal. I like to watch them as well, and you want to, you know, get something new. The only downside with doing sort of these type of TV shows is that, you know, typically, sort of I fly out and I'm there all day filming. We're sort of filming maybe 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. Of course, that sort of 6 hours or 5 hours of filming is going to be reduced to maybe sort of across an hour-long show, sort of maybe 6 minutes. Right. And there have been occasions where my words have been skillfully, and I don't mean skillfully in a positive way, I mean in a bad way. My words have been sort of skillfully edited to make it sound like I was saying something that I actually wasn't. You know, it's like if there was one case I was skeptical on, this has happened a couple of times where they said, well, can you tell us the basic story and then tell us why you're skeptical, which is fine. I'm fine about doing that. But a couple of times I told the story and then explained why I was skeptical of it, and they left all the stuff out about me saying why I didn't support the story. But by leaving me telling the story, and it actually looked like I was supporting it, the way they edited it down. So, you know, that kind of stuff makes me sort of really angry. It's like if you want a skeptic on, get a skeptic. If you want a believer on, get a believer. But don't distort the words of the people you've got on the show. Now, those cases are sort of few and far between, but for the most part, you know, TV goes fine. It's kind of like us having an interview right now on this show. And, of course, you know, you get to sort of travel to places you might not have been to before and meet witnesses you haven't been to before. So I enjoy the sort of the road trip angle of it as well. But, you know, obviously one of the main parts is that TV today, you know, is far more open to making shows on paranormal stuff than it was 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago, it'd be like a 30-second thing at the end of the 5 o'clock news and poking fun at it. Today, you know, there are entire series that have gone on for years because they're so popular. So I think, you know, that's a good thing. And it, you know, it does allow us to get information out to people who are interested in the same subject as well. And I think that's a good thing that, you know, it's helped the community to grow.
Gotcha. And I have to ask a question because of my co-host. She's very picky when it comes to, like, pictures of her. Is there a certain profile, Nick, that you prefer? Like, do you want your right side more shown on TV versus your left? These are the real questions we need to get answered on this show.
Well, that's fair enough. That's a good question. No, I don't have a preference to right or left side. But, you know, what does sort of get me angry, you know, is sometimes I'll say, it's like if it's a conference or a TV show, you know, I'll turn up and I'll be the first to admit I'm not like a suit and tie guy, you know. I grew up...
We love that about you, though. You're really rock and roll. That's awesome.
You know, I mean, I sort of grew up in central England as a kid, like a 13-year-old. I immediately got, when it kicked off in England, I was into punk rock, you know, and I still am. That's the music I like, you know. So, and I've got a shaved head, earrings, you know, biker jackets, combat boots, and people are like, well, you can't dress like that for a TV show. I said, well, sure I can, you know, and for a conference I can. And sometimes, you know, they don't like it. Sometimes they don't mind, and other times they'll grudgingly put up with it. But when it comes to sort of how I'm presented, the only time I get mad, and I do get mad, is when they try and say, well, can you, you know, could you wear this? And could you... I've actually several times, you know, can you take your earrings out? Well, no. You know, can you wear this tie? No. You know, that's why I've got a biker jacket on, because I don't wear ties. So that you know, it's this issue of... It's almost as if, well, if you wear a biker jacket, you got earrings and a shaved head, you can't be lucid enough to talk about UFOs. And it's somehow, you know, if you wear a black jacket, a white shirt, and a nicely pressed red tie, it somehow makes you more credible. And that attitude makes me want to sort of like break jaws. You know what I mean? It's like
Ooh.
it just drives me insane that people should be who they are in this subject, because it's the subject that's important and it's the data. And if you are hopefully a good researcher and a lucid investigator, and you have a good head on your shoulders in terms of, sort of good filter, so to speak, that is what counts. And if you get the story across to people in an informative and an entertaining way, where they're not falling asleep in the lecture room or whatever, that's what's important. And the other important thing, of course, which I also see sometimes at conferences, horror stories where egos take over. I always tell people, doesn't matter what you do in this subject, remember your roots, and remember also, or appreciate that we're all in this together. That you guys have got your radio show, I write books, we've got the witnesses who write their stories, or the people who've got their TV shows, whatever. But sometimes, quite often, you see people who just become overinflated, ego-driven idiots, and it becomes embarrassing. I've seen, where, I go to a conference, if people want book signing, I enjoy doing that, but also it's a right thing to do, and I spend as much time with the audience as the audience wants. We'll do the lecture, we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll hang out at the bar and chat all night about whatever people want to chat about. But I know some certain researchers, well-known ones who I won't name, who I've seen them looking at their watch because it's 10 minutes into signing books. They're like, well, I'm done, Which is, these people are coming to see you speak.
Right.
They're paying money to sit in the audience, and all you can do is gripe that you've had to sign books for 10 minutes. So I don't have any time for those kind of people at all, and
well,
just
Nick,
my view is.
Yeah, Nick, I'm all about good radio. If you could drop a name on any of those people, I would really appreciate it.
Well, I can tell you, it's certain people you see a lot of the conferences over and over again.
Okay.
And,
we're narrowing it down.
There's a public face and there's a private face, and you often only see the private face behind the scenes. But it's not a pretty face, It's like it leaves a bad taste in your mouth when you see, sort of poking fun at the audience, or sort of not willing to spend time and taking themselves off to the little table where their little clique, so to speak. I like to feel that we're all in it together. None of us are bigger than the subject, and I enjoy hanging out with people. It's and that's for me. That's how it should be. Just have a good time. You learn a lot, and don't worry about all the other sort of side effects and all this nonsense that goes on in the subject.
So basically, Tiffany, Nick is not going to give us a TMZ soundbite.
Well, I mean, I won't give you a TMZ soundbite.
Hey, you know what? We're only an hour into the show. There's still plenty of time, but Nick,
we can get him to sing too. I think that we should probably get him to sing as well, since you made me do that last time.
Okay.
You really want it to sort of pour down with rain and thunder? I mean,
we like it. We might.
Well, I play guitar, but I don't sing. So.
Okay. Well, if your guitar's close, you start strumming some chords, and we'll get Tiffany to sing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. But right now, Nick, with your permission, I'd like to bring on a special guest who has a question to ask you. It's someone.
Yeah, sure.
Somebody you're familiar with.
Okay.
Guest, you're live. Speak your name and your question. Is he going to speak? Come on, Mr. Hanks. You're live. He's live.
Maybe he's not.
I turned his mic on. Either he muted us. Mike, yeah, it is Micah.
Perhaps he's too terrified to speak to me.
And the doctor is not in the house, obviously.
Yeah, maybe when you said you started talking egos, maybe were you implying? Maybe he got a little...
He got
no, actually, Mike is a good friend of mine, and Mike is one of the good guys. Mike is actually somebody who's very open-minded on this whole subject, and he realizes, you know, that there are aspects to this that sort of go far beyond just nuts and bolts aliens, and again, that's something also that gets me mad, is that certain conferences, you know, they only want you to talk about certain aspects of the subject, you know, keep it on nuts and bolts, keep it on disclosure and crashed UFOs. They don't want to hear about paranormal stuff and poltergeist activity, and but that's what the witnesses are reporting, you know, and you can't keep it sort of like an industry, just keeping it going for the sake of keeping it going, because you're not going to learn anything. But and that's why I like Micah's stuff, because he's very open-minded, you know, on what's going on. Doesn't sort of tell the audience this is what's going on. It's more this is the data and this is where it seems to push it. So, you know, which is a good approach.
Well, Tiffany's checking with Micah to see what's up with him. Maybe he had to go to the bathroom or something.
Maybe the Men in Black paid him a visit.
Could be. You never know.
Yeah.
This could be something paranormal related. But you know, Nick, as we're I don't know, is Micah? Are you with us now?
Hey, Kevin, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We were worried you had like some type of encounter that.
I thought he was abducted. Honestly.
Yeah, exactly.
I wasn't worried. I was going to say it serves him right.
Radio Gold. It's always Radio Gold with Rick Redfern.
Yeah. What's up, Mike?
Hey, Kevin, by the way, great to get on and talk with you for just a moment here. And, of course, one of my very favorite guests and one of my favorite people, Mr. Nick Redfern. Yeah, Tiff, I know you thought I was going to say your name, but, I mean, you already knew.
Man.
Yeah, so, although she really is, which, you know, again, really good to talk to you guys. You missed the funny intro I was going to do. I've always wanted to prank Nick Redfern. Call into the show and like this, okay? This is what it would sound like.
Let's hear it.
Yes, Rick Redfern, this is your worst enemy, Vlad. I watch everything you do. I hear every word you say. You know, and just troll him for a little while. See how long it takes him to figure out who it is. Now it won't work because he's heard me do it. But,
I'd have been like, who is this maniac?
No. Nick was like, Micah, what are you doing, mate? Now,
that was pretty good, actually.
I'll say this, by the way. You know, Nick, what you were talking about, you know, the kind of the cult of personality that shows up at a lot of the UFO conferences and things like that. I know what you mean. And this coming from a guy who does wear suits at conferences. But by the same token, you know, if I'm going to wear a suit, I'm going to be like blue suit, red tie, red Chuck tees, and a sonic screwdriver in my pocket. I've got to be so ridiculous about it. And, you know, I was talking, like Nick was discussing there, I was talking with someone at one of the conferences recently, and they said, you know, Micah, I worry a little bit about you because, you know, you wear the bow ties and you'll show up with the long coats and the stuff, and, you know, it's obvious you're into sci-fi and things like that. And they said, you know, we worry that as a researcher you might not be taken fully seriously. And I looked at them, I smiled, and I said, you know, yeah, I used to worry about the same thing, and then I remembered. I had to check myself. Remember what we're talking about here. We're the UFO researchers. Do you expect they're going to take us seriously? You know, like Nick was saying, you got to be comfortable with who you are, how you look, how you want to look, how you dress. Don't be something you're not. Just be who you are. And that's really important because I guarantee you, if you're a quote-unquote ufologist, you know, the other 99% of the, you know, American populace or whatever populace, wherever you are in the world, you know, all Brits accepted, obviously. You're not going to be any more credible if you're talking about UFOs and you happen to be wearing a suit. That's what I'm saying.
Well, actually, I don't know if you heard before you came on, Mike, I said one of the things I like about your work is that, kind of like me, you're not sort of buried in one particular theory. You know, you actually a lot of your stuff takes things far and outside just nothing but nuts and bolts UFOs. And for me, that's a good thing. You know, as I pointed out, that you don't sort of worry or get concerned about, should I just be focusing on nuts and bolts UFOs and crashed UFOs in Area 51? No, you're going to some sort of really almost like esoteric areas. And I kind of just wish a lot more people in the subject would. But I think one of the reasons they don't is because there are certain organizations that don't necessarily endorse that angle, and they're worried about not getting booked for next year's conference, so they toe the line, which is kind of sad, really.
It really is sad, Nick. And, this is why I often talk about Nick and his work. I met Nick here in my own hometown of Asheville a number of years ago, and he came up for a little event with Jim Mars and our friend Joshua Warren. And immediately I could tell, again, Nick isn't concerned, whether it's in how he dresses, with the Ramones T-shirts and the Chuck tees. By the way, I'm really fond of the Chuck tees myself. Or if it's his nonconformist, non-conventional attitudes about the phenomena. Let's be clear, it's not just UFOs here. Mm-hmm. I mean, this has to, cryptozoology. This has to do with certain conspiracies, certain ancient mysteries as well. I think we have to be able to think outside of the box. And what's funny is that when you mentioned certain groups and certain agencies, Nick, and talking about trying to kind of toe the status quo, people... I really don't like the fact that there's so much divisiveness and so much polarization in terms of, well, this is the consensus opinion, scientific worldview establishment, and then this is all the fringe crazy stuff. And if we don't all agree about all the same things in the fringe crazy community, then we have nothing. I think that, and what's funny is, at the end of the day, despite that sort of attitude, really you still see that same marginalization, and you do see groups saying that if you don't agree with this, i.e., Roswell happened, there were aliens that crashed, this is nuts and bolts stuff, and disclosure is the only way. Lobbying to government's the only way we're ever going to get information about UFOs. You see that these little attitudes do become kind of cliques in their own right within this community, and if you aren't part of that group, like Nick said, you won't be invited to the next conference. You won't be invited to attend the next gala or meeting, of the people who feel that this is the only way to move forward, and therefore it's our clique. So that same sort of marginalization occurs within this community just as well, and that's a great thing that you point out, Nick, because, again, I think if we really want to understand this phenomena, yes, we can look at it scientifically, yes, we can apply good history and good historical research to it, but we also have to be willing to look beyond the contemporary memes and the there's probably a better term than meme, but I like that one. These kinds of things that have become what people expect UFOs or expect Bigfoot or expect whatever to be. You do see a lot of that. And these are the things that, unfortunately, I think steer attitudes within this field, which may or may not be accurate. And that is, in its own right, I think, a very dangerous thing, because what if UFOs don't represent alien visitation? Tiff, you and I were talking about this the other day. What if, there are different hypotheses, interdimensional, some sort of a crypto-terrestrial, or just some, flat-out earthly phenomena that could account for a lot of it. That doesn't mean that all the other theories are nil, but that does mean that we probably are dealing within the sphere of this kind of research with a variety of different things, and no single interpretation is the be-all, end-all, and yet that seems to be the narrative that those within the community often find themselves ideologically and sociologically steering themselves toward. I'd say the majority of researchers, Nick and I, I'm still pulling my hair out. Nick has pulled all his hair out at this point. But we find ourselves talking with UFO researchers, and we kind of go, God, guys, there's probably more to this than Roswell. There's probably more to this than the ETH. So I really sympathize and appreciate Nick's attitudes about, being open-minded and really looking at different things as possibilities, not, beholding ourselves only to one, this is what it must be, and therefore it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, you make a good point there because, flying saucers, UFOs, the phenomenon has been sort of researched for almost 70 years now, and we're still, sort of debating as to what's going on and who they are and what and why, and yet it's still the ETH, the extraterrestrial angle, that sort of holds sway. And as you say, maybe they are extraterrestrial, but then again, maybe it's sort of extra-dimensional, multi-dimensional, crypto-terrestrial. We really don't. Time travelers, who knows? None of us really know. But I think that what I've certainly seen is that, particularly on the conference circuit, that there is this sort of almost like an unconscious agenda, if you like, to sort of upholding the flag of the ETH. And again, I think a lot of it is because it brings people in. It becomes a business. But if it's a business, well, at least be open to other scenarios. And I think a lot of conferences aren't open to things, and I would hope, in the future that would change. But I mean, time's going to tell, or it won't. So.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask cool that I've got Micah on as well. I'm going to throw this out there. Ufology, paranormal shows are as popular now as ever on, TV. I think, I want to say Destination America. Didn't they go 24/7 paranormal, or they didn't? I think I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, they did a lot.
Is TV right now too much overproducing the paranormal type shows to where you're like, is it doing? Are these shows right now doing the paranormal,
the
the
research
ufology
justice?
stuff? Yeah, the justice, right?
I mean, that's a good question, because what I would say is that on the one hand, it's good that there's no doubt that, in the last 10 years, there's been a massive growth in paranormal TV, whether it's UFOs, cryptozoology, ghosts, conspiracies. There's pretty much every channel, History, Discovery, Animal Planet, Destination America, you name them, there's shows on all the while. But the problem is that some of these shows, certainly in the last about 3 years or so, have crossed from being documentary and head and shoulders and in the field type shows, and they've become the equivalent of reality shows, where so much of the content is basically fabricated. It's like it's just it's presented as fact, but it's not. That's why people said to me, "Why don't you have your own TV show?" I said, because so many of these shows they misrepresent situations where there'll be a team walking through the woods, a classic scenario. You've seen so many where they've got the night vision on and somebody hears something and say, "What the hell was that?" Well, what it actually was the sound guy breaking a branch, and everybody on the show, including the team, knows it, but they've signed themselves up to a hand-binding contract which requires them to go along with what the producer and the director and the channel says you've got to do because you've signed this contract. And there are so many shows like that now.
Yeah, there's a problem with that, and with me being a girl that was raised with a foot in both worlds, and I mean a foot in the good old Kentucky country girl image, along with this foot in Manhattan and other cities in the world, being able to travel and do that as well. When I see things like this, it really pisses me off, because I'm just like, for God's sake, it was a damn coyote. And it's like, oh my God, what was that? And you're just like, holy crap, these people are just these idiotic people from the city going out into the damn woods. And you're just like, are you insane? Who goes out in the middle of the woods with a video camera and heat? What is it? What's it called? The night vision and the heat. What is it called? Come on.
Is it
being
FLIR?
able to identify the heat index? Whatever.
The Predator character had the best.
Whatever. Yes, being able to search out heat. You're like, it's a rabbit. It's a possum. It's a raccoon. All of these things that go bump in the night typically have a name, and it's an animal. And that's what pisses me off so much about those shows, is that I ended up stopping. I don't watch them anymore. It's a bunch of crap, and they're a bunch of idiots. I'm sure they're great people, but the whole idea is to...
Yeah, hold on, Tiffany.
I think a bad person again.
No, your sound bites right there has officially disqualified us from any type of TV show, paranormal show. So thanks a lot for bringing me down with you. But anyway, jump in, Nick.
But no, you're right, actually. I mean, the problem is not that the number of shows, it's just the way they're presented. And the problem is that one channel has like a hit show of 8 episodes, like a team running around, and then another channel thinks, well, we've got to jump on the bandwagon, and they'll do their version. And some of them are sort of actually well done. I mean, I used to enjoy Monster Quest because I took part in some of those episodes, and they actually did film it as it happened. And if you found something, great. And if you didn't, they say well, the team did their best, but they didn't find anything. But then today, it sort of crossed the line where these reality-based shows feel they have to come up with something really strong. But the problem is, it's so over the top that it's clear that it was, it was fabricated for the show. And this almost like the scary thing is that people just don't seem to care. It's like they're being dumbed down almost to such an extent that, well, it's still a bit of fun. But you can do it properly and legitimately and tell a story. And you can still tell a great story, even if the team just found footprints but didn't find anything else,
Right.
You can still make a good human interest documentary out of it, but they feel they've got to sort of have something screaming in the woods or a shadowy figure run across, and but you don't. You can still do it well.
Well, it's like that show, Finding Bigfoot. I think that's the name of it. Can't remember what channel it's on, but obviously they're looking for Bigfoot. But what I've always been curious, what happens? Does the show come to an end once they find it? I mean, but are you tipped off when you hear the show say the series finale comes, is this coming week? Is that when you're like, oh, I'm going to tune in because they have just found Bigfoot? And that's what I'm getting at, is this overproduced type shows where, they're, shows out there to me are trying to one up the other, and they're tough to watch. Yeah.
Well, when it comes to paranormal TV, as I said, the way it kind of works is somebody has a hit show and then somebody else decides to do something in a similar theme, and somebody else does that, and it becomes saturated, and it becomes stale, and and some of them only last sort of 5 or 6 episodes and they're gone, and others might last a few series. But it could be done really well. You could still do like a reality thing but not crossing the line, of where they feel they've got to make things up and just fabricate it and fake it. They don't have to. Maybe the tide will turn because people do realize they're not idiots. They know what's going on, and that's why I'm sort of always careful as to what shows I do and which ones I don't do. Because number one, you can never be sure it can be edited, and number two, it's if the show has a history and a reputation of just over the top, that's a good pointer for me to keep away from it.
I would actually, just to chime in really quickly here, Nick, and some of the points he's made. Yeah, Nick, sorry, I'm still floating back here in subspace. But some of the I'm going to but Nick, some of the things that you say about the television programs, actually virtually everything you say I really agree with. You mentioned, or maybe Kevin mentioned, Monster Quest. That's I think a show that I used to, as far as these kind of programs go, I used to binge watch. I've never been able to get behind Ancient Aliens very much, and I think that one of the reasons that I've found that so distasteful, there are a couple of things, and I don't want to drop any names anymore maybe than Nick did, but I've gotten to know over the years some of the stars on that show, and I'll be fair and tell you that some of them I have had wonderful relationships with. Some of them, and one whom I will name specifically, Philip Coppins, he was a wonderful man, and I relished the opportunity to get to talk with Philip, because I thought that he was one of these researchers, a lot like Nick, who perfectly balanced his not belief but advocacy of facts in relation to his research, and then also I think a very good balanced and measured skepticism. Philip was a wonderful guy to work with. There are other people who have been on the program who I may care less for, and it's nothing personal. It's merely I think that they're the types that, as Nick would say, they'll come off the stage, they go to their table, they'll sign the headshots, the photos, the glamour shots of themselves and everything, and then they'll run back to their hotel room and actually have it in their contract where it says specifically that we don't have to actually interact with the conference attendees or the promoters of the conferences. We're there to do our show, our song and dance, and we come off the stage, we sell our stuff, and we leave. So that's that industry. And I will ask simply, are you in an industry? Are you in this solely to be able to make money? And you'll say anything as long as it gets you in front of a camera. Or are you in this as a legitimate researcher? Do you do the seat time? Do you spend the time in the field? Do you do the research? Do you do the investigation? Do you do the travel? Do you cover the expense that goes into all of the aforementioned? Are you willing to abandon your preconceptions and your beliefs when the facts determine that a narrative has presented itself that is completely contrary to what you believed at the outset when you went into this line of research? And this is, I think, very important to point out because as Nick relates this to these television programs, Nick, I don't know if you remember, but years ago you and I were on a TV show together, although they didn't film our segments together. The program, by the way, was called Paranatural, and it aired on Nat Geo. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
And it was an episode about natural Earthlight phenomena. And so Nick had been interviewed, and I was featured in a couple of short segments, along with the co-host of my Middle Theory podcast, Christopher McCullum. On this particular episode, they had us up at the Linville Gorge Wilderness, and I had with me at that time on camera a tri-field natural electromagnetic field detector, I think a GX1 Geiger counter, and some other field equipment. We weren't using this equipment to register anything. There was no kind of Earthlight phenomena, no electromagnetic anomalies. Nothing was being registered on our equipment that was out of the ordinary. And at one point, the cameramen and one of the producers, nice guys, they came over and they said, listen, it's obviously not a really hot night up here in the Linville Gorge looking for the Brown Mountain Lights. Would you mind just kind of dialing in some stuff on those meters and make it look like you're getting some stuff for us? So, yeah. That was the last time I've done a television program, and that was in about 2010 or 2011. And I have not gone back on a television program after that. That experience made me so sick to think that rather than actually make something compelling, in other words, let's sit down and let's talk to people, let's get some good data, let's talk with witnesses. No, let's just put on a show. Again, let's do the song and dance. And so the song and dance mentality, whether it's on a stage with purpose of selling books, whether it is playing out before a camera with purpose of trying to drive ratings, there's a serious distinction that needs to be made between those who are in this for the business and those who are serious researchers. And I'll stand any day by a serious researcher who wants to sell books that are based on serious research. We joke in the community about how many books Nick's written and how many he may have written, by the next time we see him. But you read those books, and Nick spent life researching. Anyone who wants to criticize a true serious researcher and an author for writing and selling books, I'd say, would you prefer that you didn't have those books to read? I love being able to go back over the books that Nick has written, the classics, Peter Byrne, Ivan Sanderson, Jacques Vallée. I love going over these books. If these guys had been, persuaded not to write books because it was part of the industry side of this, we would have all been done a disservice. So there's definitely a distinction between the kind of Hollywood side of this. Unfortunately, most of these shows, but not all of them, kind of bring that element. And then there is serious research, and I think that the book, the written medium, is still the best medium by which to bring that serious research to the world. And I hope that people don't blur that line too much, because so many researchers in this community are ostracized for being authors. Being an author is not a problem. It's when that becomes Hollywood that I think we start seeing issues.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Now, Nick, confirm or didn't...
But people today have a problem with picking up a book and reading it. Instead, we are saying, can I look at it on Netflix? Is it on YouTube? They're trying to find something just to view rather than read. Reading takes too long.
But that's okay, too, as long as it's a well-produced documentary. Nick and I had this conversation on the phone recently. It's something I love about Nick, and I don't want to talk over him because it's his interview. I'm just here in the background, but I will. I absolutely will say this though, Nick. If he wants to talk to me, he will call and he'll talk to me, and he has said to me before, it's easier to do this than to email. Well, in the same kind of thought, sometimes it's easier to be able to put on an Netflix documentary than it is to pick up a book and read. Who has time to read these days? I mean, I do. I try to make time for that, because I feel it's important. But there are well-produced television shows, documentaries. Again, Monster Quest was the one that you guys mentioned. I loved that show. That was one of the best TV shows on television. How is it different from Ancient Aliens? And, again, Ancient Aliens, not to criticize the show completely, Nick's been a guest on that show. But Monster Quest went into the field. Monster Quest spoke to experts. More importantly, Monster Quest spoke to witnesses, not just people who had their pet theories about this phenomena. They would go into the field, they would talk to people who had seen things, they would speak to those people who, unlike Nick or I, in honest truth, they have no ambition to write a book or to try and sell their story. They probably weren't paid when they appeared on camera. They were merely there because they had a story to tell about something that they couldn't understand or explain. And that's a big difference from this, let's just get every person with their pet theory on, make them put on a tie and a coat so that they can appear on camera and appear more credible. Oh, come on. That is such bull. Go out there.
Well, see, that's a good comment. But, Nick, so do you have I seem to feel like the experiencers are brushed aside in this community, and the investigators want to really discuss more of the nuts and bolts UFO incidents, but they don't really bring in a whole lot about what the witnesses say or saw or how it affected the witnesses, other than just like a short blurb. From what I've seen of your work, I do feel like you take the witnesses seriously and you sort of have this empathy towards them. Would you say so?
Oh, yeah. I mean, to give you an example, my third book on the Men in Black, which came out last year, called Men in Black, I mean, that's got sort of 35 witness stories or accounts from people who had theories on the Men in Black, one of them being Micah. And I invited, rather than me write it all myself, I invited 35 people to submit their own encounters or their own experiences, their own thoughts into papers for the book. And I sort of introduced everybody. There was like an introduction at the start of the book. And then I introduced everybody individually to the reader so they could all tell their own stories. And probably of that 35, probably about 25 were first-person witnesses. And, I always tell people that without the witnesses, we've got nothing to go on. It doesn't matter if you've got a TV show, a radio show, you write books or magazine articles. If you haven't got witnesses, if any of us haven't got witnesses telling us their stories, well, we've got nothing to go on. So in other words, we really should be reliant on the witnesses. But the problem is, you're right, a lot of these shows today, it's just head and shoulders interviews with researchers, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it is a good part of it, but it should be balanced out with giving enough broadcast time as well for the people who actually are the subject of, what's under discussion. It's like, for example, if you've got a show made about Roswell, you don't just want 4 or 5 of the well-known Roswell researchers. You want the families or the still surviving members, who were involved at the time. Get them on the screen as well. But you're right. That often does go out of the window, and it is just about personalities in the field and not the people who they're actually talking about.
Yep. I know I want to get onto the black-eyed children topic, but one last comment I want to make, and this is kind of what, I guess, summarizing what you all were saying about personalities. I won't say a name, but I'm a big fan of the Joe Rogan podcast. I listen to it regularly, and I try to mimic some of his style. But he had someone on from Ancient Aliens, and a question was posed to this person about Roswell. And I kid you not, he could not remember the exact year of the Roswell crash. He said, that soundbite resonated with me, and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Roswell. I'll leave it at that. But anyways, we're picking on people tonight. Are we picking on people tonight? Oh, no. What are we picking on? Oh.
No, we're just making observations about people.
There you go. Just observations. Now, I probably am picking on Tiffany when I call out her not really satisfied with the right profile when it comes to our promo shots, but I'm going to just keep doing that to her.
I'm not typically this vain, but I've never had to deal with anybody actually looking at me other than my husband or my mother.
Yeah. The truth shall set you free, Tiffany Mac. Can we jump into the black-eyed children? You got time, Nick, to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right. Share with us everything all the down and dirty when it comes to the black-eyed child.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm interested in the black-eyed children mystery is because there are a lot of sort of very deep parallels between that and the Men in Black mystery. I mean, number one, you got sort of the physical appearance, the sort of the pale skin, and in the same way that the Men in Black wear black suits, obviously, and hence the name, and black hats. Very often the black-eyed kids, they wear black hoodies. So, you've got like the black outfit, and you've also got like the headgear as well, fedora, black fedora versus a black hoodie. But also, probably more important, is the sort of similarities between, when the Men in Black turn up on your doorstep and, they find a way into the house or ask to be invited in, that kind of thing. That's exactly what the black-eyed children do. They come up with excuses like they're lost. Can they come and use the telephone? Or they're homeless. Can they have some food? Things like this. But it's always based around trying to find a way into the home. And, of course, when the people see that their skin's kind of like milk white and their eyes are just solid black, they don't let them in. Although there are a couple of reports where people have allegedly let them in. But for the most part, unlike the Men in Black, they don't find their way into the house. So that's one of the things that sort of fascinates me, are the parallels between the Men in Black. And also, like the Men in Black, there are a lot of reports where people have described strange sort of side effects where dogs that have been in the presence of the black-eyed children have apparently been sort of terrified. There's this one story of the dog sort of charging off into the bedroom and hiding under the bed. Just got this weird feeling the second the door was opened. And so, we get a lot of strange aspects to these stories. And of course, it's not surprising that various theories have been put forward and developed. The idea that, are they extraterrestrial? Are they alien-human hybrids? Are they something supernatural? Could they even be demonic? Those are sort of the primary theories that have been put together. And I guess one of the reasons why it's so interesting to a lot of people is because it's a relatively new phenomenon, about the last 7-8 years, something like that, I think. Maybe 10 years, but certainly no more than that. And it's only been in the last sort of 5 years, I would say, that it's really taken off big time. So in other words, it's sort of a new phenomenon for people to look into. And I think you put all that together, and it's sort of no wonder, that it's kind of really taken off.
Well, Nick, what's the point of these black-eyed children? I mean, if they can't come in without you inviting them, are they sort of these vampiric creatures? Or, I mean, like, okay, so typical reports of alien abduction, they don't care if they're welcome or not. They're going to take you whether you want to or not. How would this even relate to that aspect of this question?
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point because, you mentioned about, sort of other aspects of the UFO phenomenon. It's actually sort of only an assumption, really, that they are connected to the UFO subject. Now, we know with the Men in Black that typically the witnesses who get visited have had some sort of UFO experience. But very often with the black-eyed children, they've just visited people at random. They'll just knock randomly on doors or on car windows, things like this. And so, in other words, although researchers have made this connection with the UFO subject, it's actually quite a tenuous connection. There really aren't many reports of people saying they saw a UFO and then the black-eyed children visited them. As I said, there are a lot of cases like that with the Men in Black, but there aren't certainly when it comes to the black-eyed children. So, one of the other theories is that, like the Men in Black, sort of one of their primary issues is to almost like a psychic vampire. They sort of drain us of energy when where you're in sort of close proximity. So maybe it's not so much they want to get in the house, but they need to be close to you, and the best way to do that is inside. But I mean, we're grasping at straws in many respects when it comes to the black-eyed children, because, as I said, the ties to ufology are tenuous, and they have these sort of overtones of like paranormal stuff and occult stuff, to where you have to wonder, are they actually part of the UFO subject at all, or is it just something that's perceived that way?
Well, I have a friend of mine who had just spoken to me today about an experience that she had the other night. She said that she found an 8 or 9-year-old boy in her house, and she felt that he was going to attack her, and she tried to thresh, defend herself, kicking out and everything, and she was thinking that he was one of these beings, and he had these black eyes and this very strange appearance, and she felt this horrible, like a damning feeling. And she was so terrified that when she finally woke up and she shook her husband, and she couldn't quit reading about UFOs after it, and she was horribly freaked out. Have you heard of situations with the black-eyed children coming in dreams?
I've not personally got any reports of the black-eyed children coming in dreams, but what I have got is there's like this other offshoot of the Men in Black mystery that I'm sure you've heard of. They're known as the Shadow People. Now, within the Shadow People mystery, there's like a subcategory known as the Hat Man, and it's like a shadowy type figure that wears like an old style fedora hat. And I've got a lot of cases on file where people felt that, or they were woken up in the middle of the night to see this sort of shadowy fedora wearing character staring at them from the other side of the bed. And in some cases they felt they weren't fully awake, as if they were in a semi-dream state. But I've got other cases where they actually felt that these sort of shadow people wearing the fedora hats could actually invade their dreams. That they never woke up, but these entities were literally able to invade their dream state and even become part of the dream, where they perhaps suddenly turn up in the dream and threaten the person or appear before them for whatever reason. So I actually don't have any in relation to the black-eyed children, but I do have probably, I would say at least 20, something like that, of where they seem to be able to affect, our dream state or affect our sleep state, if you like.
So do these creatures, these beings, ever actually touch people, grab people? Is there any physical contact?
Usually there isn't, and people actually kind of back away from them. They just get this odd sense from them. But I do know of several reports, not many, where the witnesses did feel that this is not related to the black-eyed children, but with the Men in Black, that they wanted to be able to touch the person, and they kind of got this weird feeling that they didn't want to touch them. And one of them who actually did sort of touch their hand, got this weird vibe. They kind of felt it was almost like a wet putty or something like that. It's like a plastic kind of damp feeling, and they just felt really. They kind of one actually described. They kind of felt as if they got to jump in the shower after touching them. It was sort of that feeling, as if they'd been contaminated somehow by them.
Like a cold and clammy touch?
Yeah. Yeah, and they kind of felt, they just felt afterwards, they felt almost, well, one described, the woman said she felt kind of like dirty, like contaminated, and just wanted to, just get under the shower and, with a shower gel and just get it all off her,
Mm-hmm.
Well, Micah, what's your take on all this? Please.
Well, as it relates to the Men in Black, I have something of a pseudo-personal MIB story. The black-eyed kids, sort of a different kind of a thing, like Nick already points out. I don't know what to make of that. A lot of it sounds an awful lot like folklore and Americana, but let's just be clear. That doesn't mean that it's just again, so, a story, a myth, a fable, something that's, somebody's cooked up. When I say Americana, I would very much refer to Bigfoot as being a part of the broader Americana. It's something that we haven't managed to establish conclusively as being a scientific reality, and yet there is so much data that supports the idea that there is something going on, that it is an intimate part of our culture. So, the Men in Black, Black-Eyed Kids, they're all this very same sort of thing, and there seems to be this strangely archetypal kind of element to all of this, that maybe the phenomena, as it is reported, is a little different from the broader meaning that it kind of has and the role it plays in our culture. For instance, in South America recently, there was one of these kind of a satanic mass panics occurring at a school where numerous children not only claimed that they were becoming possessed by demonic spirits, but they were all being accosted by visions in which a dark-figured, a man in a black suit, possibly with a hat, was appearing to them. And it is interesting that in certain UFO literature that the quote-unquote MIB phenomena, which Nick has chronicled prolifically, with his numerous books on that subject, and yes, I contributed an essay to one of those books, that we do see certain similarities between those. My quick MIB story had been quite simply this. I have been, as a matter of fact, as I'm sitting here listening to the show with one ear, I have a hard time, quote unquote, turning it off. In other words, I'm always kind of researching, and something that has long fascinated me is the phenomena involving these large, silent, dark, triangular-shaped aircraft. Black triangles or flying triangle UFOs, variously referred to in various media. There was a gentleman who had contacted me years ago, and that he and his father, who was a truck driver at the time, they were traversing I-40 out through the Midwestern, or rather the Southwestern United States, and they had encountered one of these hanging low over the desert, I believe in the state of Arizona, and they had observed this thing at close range, and one of the primary witnesses had even said that he'd picked up a stone and thrown it at this object, and it kind of made a sound as though if you took a hose, an air escaped from a hose, where a hole had been poked in it or something like that, like pressurized air. So he said it was a kind of a quick kind of a noise similar to that when this rock bounced off this thing, and then it very slowly, a few moments later, began to drift away, and it just left the area. This witness had provided images, renderings that he had produced of what this thing looked like, the rough distance it was from the road, hovering over the roadway, roughly the size and the dimensions, and like a lot of these reports, this large dark triangle was, extremely large. And he contacts me a number of weeks later after relating this experience and sharing details with me in diagrams. He says, I've got an MIB story to tell you. Okay, well, sure, that's fine. Well, he emails me and he tells me the story, and the long story, greatly shortened, was that he had been making a delivery one evening, and that he had, because he took up the family business, became a truck driver himself, upon completing the delivery, he returns to his vehicle, his truck, and sees that there's a small man, short, clad in a black suit with a pair of sunglasses, dark sunglasses that wrapped sort of around the sides of his head. Despite the fact that it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, it's in Chinatown, and it's snowing. And he gets to the side of the car, and he attempts to, speak with this man who seems to be blocking the entry into his vehicle. The man is silent. He won't see anything. There's a dark vehicle in front of the 18-wheeler, and it's idling as though someone driving it's waiting for this man to come back to the car. And when the witness to the UFO event that I've been talking with gets to the driver's side door, and he's within just a few feet of this man, he says that the man speaks to him and says in a German accent, "You are to stop talking to Micah Hanks. And if you don't, you will see me again." And, when you hear those kind of stories, what do you make of it?
Wait a minute, Mike, he said your name.
The quote-unquote MIB said to the witness, as related to me in the email that he sent me, he said, you are to stop talking.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I was going to say, it would be, and Nick has experienced this too, it would be quite interesting if the call dropped at that moment.
What happened? It does happen. It happens quite often, and it seems like it happens when you're really getting into a touchy subject in the field. We've had this happen before, and it's very frustrating. And I've said this before. You know, when I've experienced the drop calls, I was typically over in Greece working on my NATO base or the naval base, and you know, I would be talking about just some local happenings with different flights and different special forces, and my calls would be dropped immediately. You start talking about the stuff that really counts, and phones act up, computers go haywire, lights start flashing. I believe it. I mean, it happens.
Hey, you guys leave me out of your government watchdog, red flag stuff. You know, I want to be able to not have to look over my shoulder. Yeah. Anyways.
Well,
wow.
I will put in there that I've had this nice little white van that has been parked out back of my house for the past month. Pops up occasionally, most of the time in the evening, and it makes me wonder. I mean, it definitely makes me wonder what they're doing, because there's absolutely nothing for them to do out there besides stare at my house. And that's only been happening since I've been in radio.
Nice. Great.
There's actually a lot of stories like that, though, where people talk about sort of vans and cars parked outside. Now, I think in some cases, you know, this is like a legitimate surveillance by some intel agency or whoever. But, you know, obviously sometimes these Men in Black stories about the black cars vanishing, we're clearly dealing with something totally separate. But I think, you know, we sort of need to look at it from a balanced perspective, that sometimes, you know, it is actually like an agency that's doing it. And I think these agencies sometimes may actually sort of use the Men in Black phenomenon as a cover to protect themselves. You know, I've heard a number of stories where, like, people in the official world, so to speak, may actually have worn occasionally like the black fedoras and black suits when they want to silence or threaten people, because it acts as a good cover. Because then if people start talking about it, people are going to say, well, you've been watching too many movies, you know. So in that sense, it actually works well, that even if the government doesn't know who the real Men in Black are, they may occasionally have sort of mimicked them as a means to protect themselves and hide their real identities. Which makes it even more confusing then.
Well, it also adds to the paranoia of these visitations and the experiencers in their daily lives. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of them who really seem on the edge of their seats all the time, 24 hours a day, and constantly looking over their shoulder and never really sleeping. You have this insomnia that goes along with it, like you're trying to stay up late enough to where the visitation won't occur. And is that something that you've experienced with different investigations that you've done?
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes that does happen. And certainly what I would say for sure is that there's no doubt, at least from the investigations that I've done, that it's the Men in Black mystery and sort of very similar ones that really do have sort of like a psychological effect, a negative psychological effect on the witness. You know, somebody sees a UFO, they might be amazed, they might be shocked, they might be frightened, but the Men in Black stuff kind of really plunges a lot of people into sort of like a total state of paranoia. And it's almost like a post-traumatic stress thing where they can't let it go. They keep worrying that, what if they come back? If I mention it on the phone, are they going to be listening? You know, is the mail going to be tampered with? And it's as if, you know, they're unable to escape from that experience. You know, it literally has sort of radically altered their lives. And you find that sometimes far more than you do if they've just had a UFO sighting. You know, they really do sort of, you know, they're careful when they leave the house. Is somebody watching them? They worry, you know, if the phone rings and it stops after one ring, they start getting worried rather than thinking it's just somebody dialed the wrong number and realised they dialed the wrong number and hung up. You know, they
right.
worry
So
that
there's actually two different sides of this scenario. You've got the supernatural aspect of these men in black that would come back to pretty much haunt you, and then you've also got this surveillance from the actual humans who are interested in the subject and how you are involved in it.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, I think sometimes if they sort of dress in that mode or follow the same pathway as the men in black, then it becomes, you know, the lines become really blurry when you're trying to figure out who's doing what. But yeah, that's why I always tell people, I mean, from my perspective, it would be very easy for me, I guess, to sort of become paranoid and obsessed, but I'm the sort of person who, you know, I like to do what I do. You know, if I'm writing books and researching, I like to sort of do it 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, and then I switch off. You know, unless we'd like doing a radio show like tonight, you know, I sort of switch off on evenings and all weekends, and then I sort of come back to it on Monday morning and doing whatever I'm doing, you know, whether it's writing an article or a book or whatever. And I feel that, you know, having that sort of other aspect of just a regular life, you know, I mean, sometimes people think I do this 24/7. They're sometimes surprised what are you doing? Oh, I'm at a soccer game, you know, or, you know, I've gone down the pub with a bunch of friends, or, you know, taking a girlfriend out for dinner or whatever. So, you know, for me, having that sort of, quote, normal life away from the other stuff, I don't feel sort of plunged into a totally sort of surreal world. You know, it's just part of the time. So,
If you don't mind, Nick, this is a part of the show where it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek off our title of our show, Shooting from the Lip, which I call Round of Shots. It's 6 quick Q&A type question-answer thing.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Just to have some fun. Number 1, what was the first concert you attended?
Oh, well, actually, it was at school when I was about 14 years old, and it was when they brought 2 bands in to play at the school, and one was like a new wave band, and one was a heavy metal band, and I can't remember the name of the new wave band, but the heavy metal band, they were called Big Daisy, and I was like 13, something like that at school, and I'm not really a big metal fan, but that was sort of the first concert I ever saw.
Tiffany, are you a headbanger? Can you bang your head with the best of them? Yeah.
Do I look like a headbanger?
Can you put your 2 fingers, your pinky and your index finger up in the air and bang your head with the best of them?
I guess I could, but that would totally go against the Catholic schoolgirl image
Don't
and
matter.
life.
Put your Britney Spears little schoolgirl outfit on and do that for me. But I'm totally digressing. Let's go back to Nick.
You want the cardigan and the pleated skirt.
I do. It's a sick fantasy of mine, but you know we're digressing here.
Stop it, Nick, please. Stop it.
2. Nick, number 2, Nick, excluding Roswell as what most people think is the UFO baseline, if you will. To you, what is the UFO go-to incident?
Well, I mean, there's a number of them. I think one of the most important would be the overflight to Washington, D.C. in July 1952, where, you know, you had radar operators, civilian pilots, airline pilots, and the Air Force, the FBI, the CIA were all concerned. And to me, you put all that together, that's sort of like a really good series of localized incidents crossing, you know, a couple of specific days.
Number 3, what show or document, something out there that's on TV right now that you have not done that you would like to do?
I would say probably, not a specific show, but I would say probably more sort of like live news. I mean, it'd be good, you know, to get on sort of like I've done that occasionally, like Fox News. I've done that, and I did Countdown once with Keith Olbermann.
That's cool.
But I'd like to do some more of that, you know, sort of an incident occurs and it's sort of live live news feed, whatever, that kind of thing.
What if we could get you... Hold on, Kevin. What if we could get you on Tosh.0? Would you do it?
On what, sorry?
Tosh.0?
Tosh.0, what's that?
Maybe we can try it and you'll find out.
Okay. I've done some great shows over the years, so I'm willing to try pretty much anything, you know.
Check it out and get back with me.
Yeah.
All right.
I was thinking Dancing with the Stars, something like that.
Well, I guess I'll give it. Well, again, I'll give it a try. You know, I mean, I guess I could sort of dance around and sort of quote from famous cases. Maybe it'd look a bit stupid, but I'll give it a try. So.
Number 4. Tell us about a scar you have and how did you get it?
I've got tons of scars. Usually playing football, East soccer when I was at school in England, and I've got one.
What's the best one? Give us the best one with the best story.
Oh, the best one is on my bottom lip. I was in a car accident when I was a kid. You know, you pass your driving test and you think you know it all, and I had an accident, and my bottom lip has got like quite a big. You can't see it too much in photographs, but it's like quite a thick, heavy scar where the bottom lip was like sliced all the way through to halfway down my chin. And so sometimes the girls like that. They like sort of a bit of a rough scar on your face, you know. So.
That whole bad boy thing, huh?
There you go.
The answer is either going to be right or left. What is your preferred Tiffany profile?
Oh, I've got to be careful now. I've got to get it right. So, well, actually, I'll say right because I saw a little video thing earlier, and that was good, and I told her so as well. So.
Okay, very cool. If you
I actually used the word hot. I didn't say good. I actually said hot.
Hot. Okay, yeah, you got to keep things in perspective.
Yeah.
If you had access to a time machine and can go anywhere in the past, living, you know, dinosaurs, anywhere, where would you go?
I might go back actually to like the 1970s to the first Ramones concert. That'd be a good one.
Yeah.
Although actually I probably would also want to go to Roswell just to see what actually did happen, you know. So.
There you go. And last question for you. In our lifetime, when I say a lifetime, hopefully in the next, 10 plus years, 10, 20 years, will we get a definite answer when it comes to alien life?
Well, you know, I would hope so. I don't want to ever look pessimistic on things because I'm actually one of these people who I believe, you know, if you're negative about stuff all the time, it creates like a negative karma around you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I'm also sort of realistic from the perspective that, you know, if you look at all the researchers who went around in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and have passed on, they never found out. You know.
Right.
Maybe it could be the same. But then on the other hand, we haven't really seen any evidence that the phenomenon itself wants to show itself to us openly, you know. We haven't had that classic landing on the White House lawn or whatever. So it's up to us, I think. And I think if there's some group, I actually don't think it's a government. I think it's almost like a shadow government that operates outside of the regular government. If they're not willing to share the information and the phenomenon's not willing to come forward, I think we just have to sort of up the ante and be more aggressive about how we not just get answers, but find alternative ways to get answers. And I think, no disrespect to the people who came before us, but collecting reports and having loads of filing cabinets doesn't really take you any further to the heart of the mystery. What it does, it means you've collected a lot of reports, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's very good thing. But we need to find a way to get a deeper inroad into who's hiding this material. And I'm not sure how we do it, but there has to be some way to open that door. And I think it's not enough for us just to collect reports and file them away. We've got to be more proactive as to try and open the doors. And if we can do that, then we stand a really good chance. You know, in fact, if we can do it, we could blow the thing wide open. But I think it means taking a very alternative approach to what's happened in the last sort of 40, 50 years or whatever.
Everything you're saying is dead on to me. And Micah, I want you to add to this. Haven't we got to the point, Micah, that we've reported all we can? What is the next, per se, step or initiative to make somebody cough up the real truth?
Nick and I often talk about that off of the air, so to speak. We have collected so much data. I think we have to acknowledge that as much as people would like to think that there is this ongoing UFO phenomena, much like it was back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, things have really changed. The number of, I think, really legitimate, full-on, truly, seemingly exotic reports of UFOs, they've diminished an awful lot in recent years. While there are some researchers who disagree with that position, Nick and I have really kind of held to that because I think that's a fair assessment of really the way that this phenomena has changed. Nonetheless, we've managed over the last several decades, when there were more interesting and seemingly exotic, unusual or just full-blown craft reports, there seems to be a lot of data that has been collected, and I find that many people say, there's no use to going back and looking at these old cases and trying to understand anything. But actually, I would differ. We can look at these old reports. We can look at what Father Gill saw over Papua New Guinea. We can look at what, maybe Kenneth Arnold says that he saw over Mount Rainier in 1947. And yes, 1947 happened to be the same year of Roswell. Whoever the famous star was on Joe Rogan who didn't know that year well, too bad. The ufologist, but
you would be blown away.
No, I probably wouldn't. It's the sad part, Kevin.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. You're dead on.
I like Joe a lot. Joe asks a lot of the right questions, and yes, you can be skeptical and still be open-minded. As Gary Posner, MD, had said once, the skeptics, the true skeptics, I don't think the modern skeptic atheists, but a true philosophically, skeptically minded person is the open-minded person who is willing to change their mind when confronted with new evidence, or new facts, I should say, new data. We've got a lot of data. Yeah, we do need to look at that data, and maybe it's time to interpret, not just continue collecting ad nauseum. We've got a lot. Let's do something with it.
Absolutely. We're down to a few seconds left on the show. Nick, plug away anything that you got going on, your projects, social media. Go for it.
Well, I've got a book coming out on July the 1st called Women in Black, which, as the title suggests, is about the women in black phenomenon as it relates to UFOs and parallels with the men in black. And I'll be actually speaking about this and the men in black, not this weekend, but the weekend after, at the Contact in the Desert conference in Joshua Tree, California.
Very cool. Micah, while you're here, please share with us your upcoming project.
Well, I always keep it simple. Micah Hanks, my name.com. There are plenty of ways people can find out about what I do, and you know what? I'm not here to do that. I'm here just to support Nick Redfern because, he's a great guest. You guys should have him back.
These 2 hours have gone by very quick, and it has been totally fun. And Micah, I can't thank you enough for coming on and hanging with us. You did your part to be a cool guest caller, if you will. So I think Tiffany had to jump off the line to take care of one of her kids. So we wish Tiffany the best with that tonight. She's being a mama right now. So Nick, great stuff. You actually came on and killed it. Yeah, definitely. We'll be in touch. I'd love to have you back on. I think, there's, as you put it, we can go hours with conversation. And Micah, I look forward to, well, let's do this. Let's have Micah on as a guest, and then Nick comes in and crashes. Yeah.
Any excuse to talk with Nick more. He's one of my favorite guys, truly, and all butt kissing aside, I mean, it's true. We're friends, and I do support my friends and the work that I think is of merit, and his certainly is.
Absolutely.
Oh, thanks, Micah.
Yeah, so Nick from Tiffany and I, thanks so much, Nick, for hanging out with us. Micah, thanks for joining us as well. You guys,
thanks, Kevin.
Have a good night. We'll hang out very soon. Nick Redfern, author, experiencer, a TV personality, lots of good stuff, good freaking show. And we've gone over 2 hours with this show. And right now I'm talking to myself because the live audience is gone. But that's good stuff because we've had 2 hours worth of conversation tonight, and I still feel like there's several more hours we could have gone with Nick. So again, much thanks to Nick Redfern for hanging out with us. Micah Hanks for coming on and sharing some of his stories. Obviously, those guys are tight, good friends, and you couldn't tell. But let me give you some social media plugs. You can find our show on the SoundCloud app, Stitcher app. You can subscribe to our show on iTunes, Shooting from the Lip, Twitter, @The Shooting Lip. My Twitter at KevinHale423. My partner in crime, Tiffany Mac, at Tiffany Mac _ET. Together, we are known as the KT Unearthly Show. It's Kevin and Tiffany time on the Friday night thing, if you will. Good show tonight again. For Tiffany Mac, I'm Kevin Hale. We bid you a good night and a pleasant day. Tune in for the next Shooting from the Lips show, which will be Monday night, May 30th, Memorial Day, when it's the RK show with my co-host, Russ Hinkle. Everyone take care. Talk to you soon.
At no time were any animals or people hurt during this presentation of Shooting from the Lip.